Okay, welcome to the Thayer Public Library's first virtual coffee with local authors. My name is Laurie Cavanaugh, and I'll be moderating today's panel. I'm the circulation librarian, and I also facilitate the library's monthly writers group. Our authors speaking today on our panel are Mary Beth McCarthy of Braintree, writing as M. Dalto. She'll be speaking about Mark of the Empress. We have Fred Pegurri, writing as Frederic Louis Pegurri of Holbrook. He will be speaking about his collection of stories, Off Center. We have Paul Pecci of Mashpee. He will be speaking about his book, Confessions of a Corsair, which is first in a planned series. And each of them will have a turn to speak and answer questions. Then at the end, we will also have a chance for the audience to ask questions of the panel in general. So I mentioned everyone in the wrong order. We're actually planning to have Fred speak first, then Paul will go next, and then Mary Beth will be the final speaker. So let me introduce Fred first, as he will be our first speaker. Okay. And it looks like we're not having any problems with audio. I'm not seeing any messages, so we'll continue. So Frederic, or Fred Pegurri of Holbrook, once he retired, he fulfilled a lifelong love affair with writing by publishing a collection of dark short stories titled Off Center. He writes as Frederic Louis Pegurri. He's been telling stories and writing since he was a young boy in Mattapan. His secret of writing is reading. He is a frequent visitor at Thayer Public Library, and I'm sure at the Holbrook Public Library as well. So please welcome Fred Pegurri. Then we can have an applause. We would normally. So please, Fred, it's your turn.
Hello, my name is Fred Pegurri. First, let me say thank you to the Thayer Library, especially Laurie Cavanaugh, for affording me this opportunity. I appreciate it. As a child, I loved to tell stories, and I loved the bizarre. 5-cent comic books taught me that a panda could talk to a chicken. Anything was possible. These comics were great for an imaginative mind. As I grew older, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, One Step Beyond with John Newland, The Twilight Zone and Night Gallery with Rod Serling, Thriller with Boris Karloff, were just a few of the items in a treasure trove of materials out there in TV land. Around the time I was 12 years old, an enormous bank in Mattapan Square was torn down and replaced with a store called Bookmark. Books, yes. Problem was, I started reading nonfiction books that seemed more unreal than the fictional television shows. The Salem witch trials, slavery, the Holocaust. At such a young age, I discovered how factual evil can exist and how it can last. Combining real evil events with Alfred Hitchcock gave me the knowledge that evil can go undetected or ignored for lengthy periods of time. I knew what my fiction would be about: dark crime. Not in any historical sense, but in a general, albeit a bizarre set of crimes. I started Massasoit in my 40s. One of my classes was, surprise, creative writing. My teacher was Dr. Timothy Trask, who also wrote. The first homework assignment was to write a story for the following week. I did. Dr. Trask liked the story so much that he brought in an author friend of his to speak to me. At the end of the semester, Dr. Trask spoke positively about my work before he dismissed us. With all this heavy wind at my back, I knew there was smooth sailing ahead. This was where reality and subjectivity came into play. I joined the writers group because I was told this group accepted all kinds of writing, anything. After I listened to one story consisting of hyperbolic experiences, then another tale laced with heavy profanity, and yet another on the joys of making colorful quilts, I got a chance to read. It seemed exceptionally quiet as I read. When I finished, instead of applause, there was a pause, until one woman said in a loud, clear voice, "I feel as if I should call the police and have them come down and check your yard." No one was laughing. I had mixed feelings. On the positive side, I was very pleased that my story was so believable that it affected the entire group. On the negative end, the heavy wind at my back turned into a gentle calm. Not every writer's group is for every brand of writing. Know the audience you are aiming for before submitting a manuscript. Know that you will get rejections. If the manuscript really pleases you, the author, be happy. It's just a matter of time, patience, and work searching for an outlet. Patience is the key word. Finding KDP on Amazon saved the day. Type in Kindle Create on Google and download. It's free. There are tutorials if you have questions. Use their many choices of book covers if desired. Use an ISBN number they provide for your paperback with the understanding your work can only sell on Amazon, excuse me, in paperback or in Kindle. Or you can go about getting your own ISBN number and sell anywhere. I stayed with KDP. All printing is done by them. You decide the price from their table of prices that reflect the author's book and judgment. I suggest that the author realize that he or she is not James Patterson. I also hired LegalZoom to do all the paperwork, which was sent to the Library of Congress, and I got my copyright. Two programs that are making life a lot simpler while writing my next book are Scrivener and Writing Pro Aid. I hope these suggestions benefit you. My book, Off Center, is made up of 10 tales in the crime genre that run from the gamut from complete confidence and pulling off the perfect crime to impulsively or purposely committing an act that puts one in the criminal element. They are dark tales, and every character is off-center. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, Fred. If anyone knows how to give the virtual round of applause, please do. Oh, actually, I guess we can't do that because we can't see you guys today. Nicole put it into the chat. So we can imagine the applause. Thank you, Fred. I just want to clarify for people, I see a couple of hands raised in the audience. If you can possibly find the chat and type your question in, I think that would be the easiest way for us to get the questions to the author. So this is Fred's chance to answer some questions you might have for him individually. I do see some comments in the chat. We have someone saying, Carlene saying she would like, sounds like she would like your book. Nicole's clapping, Carlene's saying yay. I don't see any questions, and that could be because you answered all of the people's questions in your talk. But does anyone have a question for Fred specifically? And if the people raising their hands want to type into the chat, you can find it at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a tablet, look for the little word more with the 3 little dots. So Fred, you mentioned the tip of finding the readers for your work as you're working on it. Not every manuscript is for everybody. Did you eventually find the readers to read your drafts?
I had my daughter read my draft. When you send into KDP, you have to meet their requirements. So I'm sure someone in there, at least, looked at it. When I wrote some of these stories when I was in college, and I do have to say that they got very warm reception. And I was very pleased with that. Especially, I started late, and I got applause. I mean, it's a blast. I love this.
That's great. We have a few comments from the audience saying, nice job, Fred, and fascinating presentation. Thank you. Do you prefer to read the types of stories that you write?
I read everything, nonfiction, fiction. My next book is a totally different genre. I love courses from the great courses. I have many of them. I love reference books, anything, because everything puts something in your head, and all of it can be used somehow. So I just love reading, always have.
Great. We do have a question. How do you get your ideas?
The ideas, sometimes I dream them. Sometimes it's so difficult to answer that question because they just come. It'll all of a sudden it'll be there, and I will have the ending of the story in my head before I even know what I'm going to write. That's happens many times. I get the beginning after that, and then the middle, that's the work. But in this next story I'm writing, it just seems to be falling into place. So maybe as I get older, the ideas come and they flow better. But in the past, my ideas came from an ending. I would get an ending and I'd say, wow, how do I get here? And it sounds easy, but it's not. That's that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's the end of the questions for Fred at the moment. If you think of one, type it into the chat and we will try to ask the authors to answer at the end as well. But I do want to, we'll give Fred another round of applause in our virtual world, and we will go on to our next panelist. So next we have Paul Pecci, writing as PM Pecci. He has devoted his life to pursuing his love for art, beauty, and history. A self-avowed Renaissance man, he enjoys painting, writing, music, gardening, nature, and the stars, the basic art of creating, and he has a passion for traveling, especially to his beloved hill towns of Tuscany. After a 50-year career in banking, 30 years of which were spent in Braintree, he now enjoys the luxury of pursuing on a full-time basis those things about which he is most passionate. And I don't know if I mentioned again that he is from Mashpee, a resident of Mashpee, but again, he worked in Braintree for 30 years, so he has a local Braintree connection. And Paul, it's your turn. Please welcome Paul Pecci with a virtual round of applause.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'd also like to thank Terry Stano and Thayer Public Library for having me back, although this is the first time I'm back as an author. I'm also an artist, as Laurie had mentioned, and in fact, I was the first artist to display my work there at the grand opening of the library. Also was past president of Braintree Cooperative Bank and South Shore Bank, and also as past president of the Braintree Rotary Club. I've always shared a very special relationship with the library and the citizens of Braintree. I'm honored to be here today, sharing the screen with other local authors, which is really cool, as I celebrate my upcoming first year anniversary in my new role as an author. I retired last year after 51 years, a 51-year career in banking, and I've been able to focus my attention on my writing, my art, my gardening, as Laurie mentioned, cooking and travel, although I haven't done a lot of traveling lately, unfortunately. Never did I imagine that we'd be locked down here for so long, but I have had the opportunity to hone my skills on Zoom and Facebook and Instagram, all the things that I made fun of only like 6 months ago, but I find that it's very helpful for me now. And I guess we can say welcome to the world of horror science fiction that we're in right now. Retirement has brought me many gifts, most importantly, the gift of time. Time to create, to enjoy everything that I managed to overlook when I was working crazy hours in that. Not that I didn't have a career, but it just never gave me the opportunity, the time to sip a cup of tea early in the morning in my garden tea house, or listen to the birds and the wind and the trees. Time and reflection have fertilized my creativity and have helped me tremendously in my writing. It allowed me to finish my first novel and is spurred to the second. After over 10 years of research and formulation, I finished and published my first novel under my own publishing company, Braintree Books, and it's called The Pecci Chronicles, Confessions of a Corsair. It's a historical fantasy novel, the first in the Pecci Chronicles series. which deals with the Peccis of ancient Tuscany. They were a wealthy and powerful family whose prominence spanned through the 19th century and produced wealthy merchant bankers, rulers, counts, contesses, Renaissance patrons of the arts, writers, historians, bishops, cardinals, saints of the church even, and the Pecci Pope, Leo XIII, whose reign ended in 1903. So he was Pope for 25 years. Confessions of a Corsair is a story set in the 12th and the 13th century of Europe, an astonishing tale that chronicles the life of Giovanni Pecci da Cortona during a violent period when popes, emperors, kings, churches, and city-states all battled for survival and for power as began its rise to dominance in trade and in global wealth. This period of history is truly, I believe, the original Game of Thrones. The seeds of this novel were planted in me when I was actually in my late 30s, when I was having a midlife crisis between stress, job loss, economic pressures. They all affected my health, and in an effort to reduce that stress, I got into meditation and into tantric journeying. My art was also my stress release valve. The more I got into the various forms of meditation, the closer I got to my inner voice. And that voice seemed to come from somewhere in the distant past. My life began to change, my dreams, my paintings, my doodlings, my cooking, everything. It just all seemed to change, becoming more Italian Renaissance-like. I seemed to have connected with an ancient part of my DNA memory. Some might call it a past life regression. It was truly cathartic for me. And it was during this time that an inner voice began to call to me, and the seeds began to germinate within me. I had never been to Italy, and I had never even considered going, but I suddenly had this need to travel there. And so in 2001, I convinced my wife to travel with me, and we ended up going to Sicily, and then we made our way north to Positano, and then to Rome, and ultimately we settled in Siena, in Tuscany. It was in this ancient hill town that I finally experienced home. I just had this feeling that I had lived there in the past, and I was so comfortable walking the streets and the alleyways, not knowing where I was going, but being led by some inner knowledge and familiarity. The trip was incredible, and it caused us to return more than a dozen times over the past years. I've always learned something new. Following that trip, I began research into my family history in earnest, and so much has been revealed to me over the past years. The following year, after 2002, I happened upon a small hill town on the Umbrian border of Tuscany called Cortona. And it was there that I actually found reference to my inner guide. There's a 12th century merchant banker by the name of Paolo Pecci. And over the years, it has been Paolo, I believe, that has guided me to uncover all the clues and the connections to my family's history and my past lives. It's Paolo's story that began to formulate in my mind. After years of research and travel back to these locations throughout Italy, and I began to pen Paolo's story in earnest about 5 years ago. I had intended his story to be the first book in a series which chronicles his life and the life of the Peccis and the historic events that were all around there. While writing the first chapter, though, I developed the character of Giovanni, who was Paolo's father in the story. But he became so important a figure that I felt that he warranted his own book. So Confessions became book one in the series, and Paolo's story, which is of sinners and saints, will be told in book two. As another one of those strange coincidences, after having completed and published Confessions in December, I have since found reference of a merchant banker named Giovanni Pecci, who preceded Paolo, and I'm not sure if that was his father. I just found it, I found my choice of names very eerily coincidental, I guess. So anyway, in book one, Giovanni is the narrator of the story, and it's in the form of a confession. With so many sins to confess, the book had to be edited down about half of its original to keep it around 430 pages. I opened the book in Giovanni, the castle of Stigliano, which is a real place long in the history of the Pecci family. And one I have visited on many occasions. I got to know the owner quite well. And he's given me all kinds of facts and information on the Peccis of old. And this castle actually will be one of the characters in my books as we go forward. The historical figures and the events are real, as fantastic as they may seem, though they are presented through Giovanni's prejudices. And there is also a good deal fantasy I used to spice up the story. The term Corsair, by the way, is a pirate, and it was used by the English and the French as a derogatory name for the Sienese bankers. But Giovanni learns to wear that badge quite proudly, and as he's pulling all the strings behind the scenes. Confessions of a Corsair is a story about a man who does whatever it takes to advance himself in a world of corruption and greed, only to find out too late the ultimate cost of his decisions. It's a remarkable story with lots of action, twists and turns, all the deadly sins that were as common then as they are today. As true a story today as it was 800 years ago, I believe it to be very thought-provoking and a great read, especially during these long days of isolation. If I may, I'll do a brief synopsis of the book, or if I have time. Are we doing well? Okay. Giovanni is old and he's dying. Throughout his life, he has played the game extremely well. He is rich and he is powerful. His business empire spans the Western and the Eastern world, but he's running out of time. He has attained everything that he has ever wanted, yet he lacks that which is most desirable to him, his eternal salvation. As his life is coming to an end, he finds himself alone and full of remorse. His only companion is his faithful servant, Nikos, is all that's left to him. All the rest are they're all gone, either dead or enemies or indifferent to him. He sits alone in his tower, reflecting upon his life, knowing that death is coming for him. The voices and the visions which had deserted him for many years have returned, and he does not like what they have shown him. His hope is to make one last deal with the Holy Spirit for forgiveness and salvation. Thus, he begins the arduous task of chronicling his life story, sharing with the world all the sins committed and all the mistakes made, and begging forgiveness from everyone he has wronged in his life. He's facing a race again to complete his confession before he's delivered to his final judgment. But Satan will not give up so easily. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We give Paul a virtual round of applause. Thank you. Some of the authors might think that's cheating to have a spirit guide, but
everything has been
that's
coincidental, or it's just so real for me. It's really quite interesting.
That is great. We have a few comments, question. The question is just, do you need to do a lot of research on the history of people in the times? And you might want to just say how you combine your research with your traveling and tourism does it end up taking over your trips to do the research?
My wife forces me not to make it take over the whole trip, but we do find ourselves in locations that I have been writing about. So there is a lot, and similar to in science fiction, creating worlds and stuff, there is so much detail, particularly in historic novels, where you have to get the history somewhat right. As I said, all of the events that are taking place actually happen. So there is a lot of research, a lot of books. I'll write about a certain battle or something that really changed the course of history. So there are a lot of books written about that. So then I do read a lot of those books. So there is a tremendous amount of research there. On the family history side, it's been so much fun because it just keeps opening up to me. And what started as just handed down tales from my grandfather turned into this journey back in time all the way to the 11th century. So quite interesting.
Great, thanks. We also had a congratulations message from Nicole on your writerversary, your anniversary of your book. And she also mentions she loves the connections to your family and the Italian life, and it makes it a great excuse to for research, have to go to Italy.
Absolutely.
So that's nice.
Absolutely.
One more question from our audience. This is from Bill Fleming, who's also a past speaker at Coffee with Local Authors. The question is, which title are you most proud to be called? Banker, author, or artist?
You know, I guess I'm title fluid. You know, I have great honor with all of those. I spent my entire life as a banker. Actually, I have other titles as well. You know, father, husband. You know, all of those that I think I wear just as proudly. I love my art. I have been I have been painting for years, and but this is just a new direction that my life has taken, and so I take on a new career and a new title, and that's wonderful.
Great, thanks. We have one more question, which I think we'll wait until the end to answer. It has to do with publishing, which we may open up to all panelists. Bill says, thank you, great answer. Thank you all for being so accommodating with this virtual question and answer. It's just not the same, I know, but you're doing great in the audience. Thank you for your participation and your questions. We will get to the questions for all the panelists at the end. I want to move on. Thank you very much, Paul, for your speaking. And
Sure.
We will move on to our last panelist. And at the end, we will open up the questions again. And I will be sure to get to the ones we haven't answered yet. We haven't asked our authors to answer yet. So let's see. Now we will move on to our third and final speaker, Mary Beth McCarthy of Braintree. She writes as M. Dalto. She is a young adult and new adult author of adventurous romantic fantasy stories. Her best-selling debut novel, 2,000 Years, was a 2016 Waddy Award winner through Wattpad.com. She has since released 2 companion novellas and the sequel, Mark of the Empress, which she'll be talking about today. Mary Beth spends her days working as a full-time real estate paralegal, leaving her evenings free to pursue her writing. She currently lives in Braintree with her husband, their daughter, and their corgi, named Loki. Please welcome Mary Beth M. Dalto.
Hi, Laurie. Thank you very much for having me. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in this very different, scenario. But I am from Braintree. I've lived in Braintree my whole life. My family still lives here. We came back here. So it's truly an honor to be a part of this community and to be here. When I was in Braintree High School, if you had asked me if I was going to be a writer, I would have laughed and said, no way. I did not enjoy writing for obligation. I did not enjoy reading for obligation. I wanted to do things on my time, my terms. I was that unfortunate kid that would wait until the day before an assignment was due and turn in the paper the next day, but still get a good grade on it. So that was the first sign that I realized that maybe writing was something I could do and I could do well. I never really pursued it seriously. I never thought about pursuing it seriously. I did always keep a journal and a diary growing up. I would always write stories about games my friends and I would play, and if I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, I would be the one to write the scribe and write the tales of what we did, all the nerdy geeky stuff. But I think that's truly where my love for fantasy began. Again, it wasn't until about 2014 that I sat down and finally started writing my debut novel, 2,000 Years, which is the first book in the Empire Saga series that Mark of the Empress is part of. It actually came to me as being inspired by a song of the same name by Billy Joel. But that was back in 1995. So it took me a long time to actually get my thoughts together and coherent enough to actually begin writing something anywhere close to a novel. But I did it. I did it during the NaNoWriMo event in November of that year, which was a goal of writing 50,000 words in 30 days, which sounds crazy, and it is, but it got done. And it allowed me to realize that writing was actually something I wanted to do and I enjoyed doing despite the deadline. So 2,000 Years was written then, and initially it was going to be a standalone novel. I had it all planned out. It was going to be one, done, no more. What else could I possibly think about writing about? But as I went through it and I continued writing and I started creating these characters, I realized that I wasn't done yet. I was far from done. So the next November, I wrote Mark of the Empress. And now, as the series is coming closer to an end, the third book, Beginning's End, will be out in this September. And the fourth book will be out next year. I just have realized that writing has become not necessarily a lifestyle, but a hobby, something I actually enjoy. And finding something like that is rare, and it's something that I've definitely, grabbed onto and come to realize that although it may sometimes seem like a second job, it's a job I'm okay working with and enjoy doing. And so these books have become a big center of my publishing experience. I am published through a small press. I am not self-published, which was very hard for me personally because I don't know if I ever could do it. So the querying process, and I can get into that later, is definitely something that was a little eye-opening as well, because you realize that not everyone is going to like your work. No one has to like your work, but so long as you like it and you write it for yourself, at the end of the day, that's really what I feel is what matters. Because if you can't write for you, what's the point of writing? So these stories are fantasy stories. These stories involve a young woman who is a Starbucks barista in Boston who comes to find out that she is a predestined Queen Empress in an alternate reality where prophecy determines life and death and how things go. I don't want to get too much into it because this is the sequel. Mark of the Empress is a sequel to 2,000 Years. But it is a story about, what is choice? Do we have to follow through with our fate? Or can we make our own decisions? Is good versus bad really what the world is about? Or, is there that gray area, and can redemption, be possible for the people that we think have done us wrong? And a lot of, romance and friendship and family, all wrapped up into a book that was supposed to be one and is now 4. So these books truly are part of my growing growth as an author, and do have a lot of my heart in it. And I love sharing them. And again, thank you so much for letting me be here and for sharing this with everybody.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Virtual round of applause for Mary Beth. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions specifically for Mary Beth? I do have a few comments. One is Nicole nodding along with you about the querying process being difficult. And there's thank yous from the audience. Do you find you need to make an outline, or do the words just come?
I am the worst at planning, which is why I think this series became as large as it was. I do not outline. I may figure out what the ending will be of a story first and then go from there. I also write very disjointedly, where I may think of some dialogue in my head and I'll write that down, and then I will connect the dots before, and like I'll make scenes around a piece of dialogue, or I'll see a scene in my head and I'll make it the scene or that happened first, and then I will write to connect it. I have had instances where if I'm trying to write linearly and it's just not coming, I will skip ahead to the end and write something I want to write instead and come back to that later. So no, I am the worst when it comes to outlining. I'm the worst when it comes to planning. But for me, I feel that's okay, because if I had those restrictions, I think very much like to what it was in school. If you have these restrictions and these guidelines and these rules that you have to do, it almost makes me not want to do it. So I do not outline, because I feel it gives me more of a creative freedom to change my mind later.
Great, thank you. Do you find kind of along that same lines that writing for a genre is limiting or freeing, because you have you know, some parameters to work within?
I love writing fantasy because I feel like I can make up my own rules. And so long as the rules are, you know, consistent, and I can set up my own parameters pretty much. When you create worlds, when you create these governing systems, this magical systems, you as the author get to say what they do and what they are, but you also get to create their own limitations. So I like writing. I think that's why fantasy draws to me, because it allows me to, like you said, like, yeah, I get to create what it is I want to work towards. Yeah, so like when Paul's talking about researching his historical fiction, like, I'm the worst at researching. So I kudos to that, because I much rather make up my own rules than have to follow anything strict.
Great, thank you. We don't have any more questions specifically for Mary Beth, but there is a congratulations to you and all the parents who have become teachers to their children and caretakers during this time, during the lockdown. Which, yes, this is a strange time that we're in. For some writers, I assume you're grabbing the chance to get more writing time in. Others are just finding more to procrastinate on. I don't know. So I am going to stop the recording of this portion of the program, but please stay. We are going to open up the questions for the author panel in general, and I will be sharing the purchasing information for each of the books. So there's a couple of questions about that, how to purchase the books. But thank you all for today's panel, Coffee with Local Authors, the Thayer Public Library's first virtual Coffee with Local Authors event. Speaking today, we had Frederic Lewis Pegurri, or Fred, who spoke about his collection of stories, Off Center. Paul Pecci spoke next, of Mashpee. He spoke about his first book in a planned historical fiction series, Confessions of a Corsair. And just speaking just now, we had Mary Beth McCarthy writing as M. Dalto, and she spoke about her latest romantic fantasy novel, Mark of the Empress. So thank you again to the audience. Please don't leave. We are going to continue with the questions and answers, but I am going to stop the recording of the program. Thank you.